year. So she was very excited about it. She actually said, oh, I think she thinks her talk would complement his and yours quite nicely, so that's why she thought if she goes in the middle.
I just don't want her to feel like that we, somehow we put Charles like after she was in.
taking a seat, please? We'll get started. Guys at the back. Everybody start taking a seat, please. We'll get started. Cheers. I don't know if there's enough chairs. Okay. Hopefully there's enough chairs for everyone. Okay, I think we've just got about enough chairs, so we'll welcome everybody. For me? Someone lost it? Welcome everyone to the July Scottish Blockchain Meetup. We've got a great night ahead for you, so it's definitely the most popular meetup we've had. So thanks for everyone for coming along. I think we had about 117 people registered this morning before ICOS told me to shut it down, just due to capacity fears. So great to see so many blockchain enthusiasts, coming out in Edinburgh tonight. So thanks to everyone for making it. Just some formal announcements. So because there's so many people here, there's no fire alarm set for tonight. So if you hear one, please don't panic. There's a fire exit just at the back and out there to the right, just the way you came in. Toilets are out on the left and straight ahead, and the beer and pizza is directly behind you. So make use of that. So tonight we've got a great lineup for everyone. We've got Professor Agalos Kiayis, hopefully I said that right, who is close enough. So Agalos is the professor here at the uni, chair in cybersecurity and privacy for Edinburgh Uni Informatics, and also director of the newly established Blockchain Technology Laboratory in partnership with IOHK. I've got Susan Ramanat, who's the CEO of Spiritus Partners as well. And finally, we've got Charles Hoskinson, who's the chief executive of IOHK and also co-founder of Ethereum. So should be a really good night. So I'll hand over to Agalos and we'll get started for tonight. Thank you.
All right, so thank you everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Daryl, for organizing this meetup here, and it's a pleasure to have you everyone here at the Informatics Forum for this blockchain meetup. All right, so I'm going to start a little bit with the Blockchain Technology Lab, which Daryl mentioned. Now I'll tell you a little bit about what's the mission of the lab. So the lab was recently established at the University of Edinburgh. And our objective is to explore the fundamental open questions regarding deployment of blockchain technology. So another important topic, conduct security performance analysis following a rigorous discipline as it suits University of Edinburgh. And further and final, and very importantly, make the results publicly available, open source, release them under Creative Commons so that the area benefits and grows as a whole. So this is the mission of the Blockchain Lab. And I'll tell you a little bit about what is the time plan. The formal launch was back in February, and it was covered in many news venues. These are just examples like that I have listed in that slide. The location of the lab is just behind you in our beautiful Appleton Tower, which is getting renovated as we speak. And the lab right now has a temporary space at the 5th floor, but eventually it's going to be situated at the 8th floor of the building, hopefully with full operation in fall 2017. A number of researchers at the PhD and postdoctoral level will be working at the lab. And what we hope is that the lab is going to be an integral part of informatics, continuing like the research excellence tradition that University of Edinburgh Informatics has over the last decades. So also a nice pairing that is going to also take place at the next academic year, that I'm very pleased that a blockchain and distributed ledgers course is going to be offered for the first time in the computer science curriculum at the School of Informatics. This is a new course which I proposed, and it was approved for inclusion for our undergraduate and graduate students. This will be a course that students at the 4th year of their study will be able to take, and also first-year graduate students will have the opportunity to attend. So I do hope there's going to be a lot of synergy between the students of informatics here and the blockchain lab. And I also do hope that there's going to be a lot of opportunity to interact with the community, the blockchain community at Edinburgh, which I really hope will also welcome the lab as being like a venue and a place where you could interact, you could learn more things about blockchain and the people that are working there. So some of the research themes that we're going to be studying at the lab is scaling blockchain protocols, which is a tremendously interesting question. Like right now, energy efficiency is one of the major bottlenecks, is one of the major issues of blockchains. Transaction processing time is another major issue. How will we evolve blockchain protocols? Like, these are very interesting questions about that. Having multiple blockchains like operating together and smooth somehow transitioning assets between them. This is another very interesting research theme that we'll pursue. Privacy issues, an extremely important issue in the blockchain domain, is not very well it's not very well studied. There are some solutions. There are also huge regulatory concerns about privacy-preserving operations in blockchain systems. There is tremendously interesting research to be conducted in the area. So, and of course, like whenever you think about privacy, you also have to think about utility. Actually, one of the aspects of blockchain which is very interesting is the fact that you can mine the blockchain data, and this increases the utility, the possible utility that blockchain systems have. So this is another consideration when you think about this in conjunction to privacy. Is it still possible, like, to have all the utility we want from a blockchain system while still preserving the privacy of the entities that are participating in the system? Blockchain as a service, what we can do with things more interesting than just like having transactions between assets, and this like suggests smart contracts, understanding the incentives of these protocols, and various applications which live once you have a blockchain. And there's like very interesting work in cryptography in areas that cryptographers call like secure multi-party computation, that very interesting questions could be answered there using blockchain systems, and there are many more other questions. Finally, hardware-assisted blockchain protocols is another very interesting domain, and this is just a handful of the very interesting research questions that we're going to be studying. So, just to give you a glimpse of a little bit of how we work and how we do research in the lab, I'll just do a very brief intro of what was the title in my talk, which is Proving the Security of Blockchain Systems. So, I'll just overview in one slide, what does it mean to build a secure system? So, what you might think as a starting point is we do have an objective. This is what we want to do. Like in the simplest objective you can think, like there are two parties that want to send a message to each other in a way that someone that eavesdrops their communication channel doesn't get it. So that's the objective. Then we can ask, what are the resources that the parties could utilize, or the software that the parties run could utilize? So the resources here could be like the programs, the software, the system that they're running, whether they have access to randomness, whether they have access to devices they can trust. So these are the resources that parties have. And now you design a threat model, which you describe what you think can go wrong. Who are you designing the system against? Who is the bad guy? Who is the actor that would like to subvert the system, and what they can do? And based on that, you come up with a candidate solution. Now, this solution is just a candidate. It's just what you hope you'll be able to satisfy and meet the objective you have using the resources that you have assumed are available to you in the given threat model. Then finally, You come up with some assumptions that you believe are reasonable, and using that, finally, you produce a security proof that says the candidate solution under those assumptions can meet the objective, assuming the resources are available in the given threat model. Now, this is the process of building secure systems, and this is a process that over the last 4 decades, the computer science community has very successfully used to produce protocols that right now constitute the backbone of how do we engage in secure communications and other systems in the internet. Now, once you have all that, you can start asking questions. These are the resources that you assume that are they available? Is your threat model realistic? Are the assumptions plausible? Now, when you have a security breakdown, what happens is that some of these questions that are posed here, they're actually negative. So basically, what you've done, your modeling was actually wrong. That's why you have a security breakdown. And frequently, when a secure system collapses in the real world, it is because it was not analyzed properly. Another interesting question, though, that even if you are comfortable with all those three, is like, is that really a good solution? Because perhaps there is a different set of assumptions and resources, and perhaps another threat model that might be realistic, which will allow a different solution. And that different solution could be much better in a number of ways than the one that you have designed. So, this logic can be applied to any system which is security critical. And here is how the previous logic can be applied to TLS. How many of you know TLS? Or what is TLS? Okay, well, a good number of them, that's what I hoped. So TLS is the absolute backbone of secure internet communications. And even if you don't know it, you have used it today, maybe multiple times, because you have checked your Facebook account, you've checked your Twitter, you've done your email, and all those messages that you sent were sent through TLS. So TLS is a system, a protocol that our community, the cybersecurity community, has spent decades trying to understand how to make it secure. And only now, after 1976, the seminal work of Diffie-Hellman proposed the first solution, if you want, the first candidate of what might be a solution. And just now, just a couple of few years ago, like in 2014, we do have a security proof that we can say with certain assurance that can actually provide indeed the logical statement that this protocol, as we have designed and implemented it, meets this objective. And imagine, this is just for sending messages. It's not a simple problem to design secure systems. So, with this introduction, now you can think, well, the Bitcoin blockchain protocol. How does this protocol fit into this framework, into this frame of thinking? And interestingly, what came first is the protocol. This is what came first. It's not even the objective. The first thing we learned, the first thing that it came to us, was the protocol. And then we were asking, wow, this protocol is truly remarkable. But what problem does it really solve? This is a question that people in the research community, as well as in the industry, have tried to wrap their mind around. But all of them, as I'm assuming all the people in this room also are, completely enamored by the fact that this protocol, there is something remarkable about it. But what is it? And in order to answer this in a principled way, we have to put it into this framework, because this protocol meets a security objective. This is why it's interesting, because it solves a security problem. Because without the security problem, the Bitcoin protocol is really nothing. It's just a very slow, very stupid database. And thus, without its meaning, its weight as a security critical protocol, it's not interesting. So, the resources that it uses is an unreliable authenticated broadcast, and there is certain threat model that it assumes. It's like that somehow like the hashing power is bounded. And question mark there, the objective is to provide you a record of transactions. And under some assumptions which were not very clear, the protocol probably meets the objective. So before the research that we have performed, all of these were very unclear. So all these question marks were looming in the protocol. And what I'm happy to say is that we have done very substantial steps forward in a number of papers that we published the last few years in understanding the Bitcoin blockchain protocol from a principled building secure systems approach. And given that the time is very limited, I'm not going to be going into any more details about this, but it's something that I would welcome those of you that would like to understand more. How can you formally argue about the protocol like Bitcoin? You are be very happy to share with you literature, scientific literature that would help you navigate this domain. Now, in the last few minutes, I'm just going to go and revisit that. Okay, now we have Bitcoin, and we've actually even managed to argue that indeed it works. But is it really the best solution that meets the objective that we have set out to solve? And if you look at Bitcoin, like in this general domain of protocols that all solve the same problem, starting from a centralized database and going to Bitcoin, you can think of them like in this like two-dimensional space. Decentralization is like this horizontal coordinate, and the y-axis here is performance and energy efficiency. So a centralized database clearly is somewhere here, but it's a single point of failure. And Bitcoin, it's in this part of the domain. It's very decentralized, but not particularly efficient, does not scale. And of course, this raises the question, what could be here in this coveted part of this two-dimensional space? Both decentralized and efficient. And what is the big question and the big challenge is like, yeah, there might be protocols that do exist and live in that part. And these are protocols that use the so-called proof-of-stake logic. Proof-of-stake logic, which some of you might be familiar with, is an alternative way of designing these protocols that doesn't have this proof-of-work barrier, if you want. And this proof-of-work barrier basically says that you have to solve this difficult computational problem in order to perform progress in the protocol. So these protocols do not have this barrier, and thus, in principle, they can run their blockchain at maximum speed. Basically, with every heartbeat, the protocol could process new transactions without having to invest computational effort. No time to go into more detail, but I hope like this gives you just in one line a proof-of-stake, proof-of-work contrast. And with this, I'll just introduce Ouroboros, which is a proof-of-stake protocol that we designed together with ICOS, and also not only designed, but proven secure and implemented it in Haskell, our preferred language here at the University of Edinburgh. So the implementation is carried out by ICOS as part of their Cardano blockchain platform. And you can see in this website more information about this project, which I also think further on in the presentations today, Charles might also talk about it. So what is fascinating about the research we have done about this protocol is that not only we have a proof of security in a proper threat model, like the one I mentioned, but also we have conducted game theoretic analysis that shows how our design could have superior properties, for example, compared to those of Bitcoin, in terms of its game theoretic properties. And this has to do with what's known as a Nash equilibrium, which the protocol satisfies. So, this was my short introduction of the blockchain lab, and just to give you a glimpse of the research work that we do at the lab. So I'm going to stop here, and thank you very much for your attention. Also, I should say that in the interest of time, and because we have 3 speakers today, as opposed to the usual 2, I would recommend that if you have questions, I will be more than happy to take them at the end of the event, or even like, you know, in the coming days. We're all here, and I'm available. So if any of you are interested, feel free to send me an email and find me on the website of Informatics. I'll be more than happy to discuss with any of you that would like to know more about the blockchain lab and our research. So with this, I'll stop here, and I'll ask our next speaker, which is Susan, to come to the stage and get ready with her presentation. Also, I'd like to thank Linda McDonald for giving us her Visa credit card. We thank you very much for leaving it here, and we really appreciate your donation to the blockchain meeting. Well, yeah, I was like, yeah, well, sorry.
Sorry for the mystery of technology. My name's Susan Ramadan, and I wanted to thank the University of Edinburgh, our host, MBN, as organizers, and all of you for joining us. I am juxtaposed between an academic whose work I actually did read a couple of his papers. I will confess that the math was well beyond me. But I have some appreciation for the expertise that he's bringing, and certainly I'm optimistic on behalf of the community here in Scotland for what the blockchain lab will be doing. Charles on the other side, his sleeves rolled up and been very active in the both the Ethereum community as originally conceived and as things have evolved. So I'm looking forward to hearing his comments. It's interesting, the arc of my own life and how I find myself here in Scotland and focused on blockchain. I actually started on Wall Street at Dow 700. You can go back and look at the charts. That's roughly 1980. Oil prices were $30 a barrel. Folks thought it would go to 100. In fact, it went to 5. We went through the 87 financial crisis, a few other bumps and grinds along the way, and then the 2007, 2008 financial crisis. During that course of that time, I worked in institutional sales, selling research, trading, and IPO capabilities to top investors, some of the first hedge funds. Then I flipped to what's called the buy side, so I was actually working with a money manager, making recommendations for securities to be put into the portfolio. Industries such as auto, chemicals, hospital supply, software, and semiconductors, and a little defense aerospace thrown in the late 80s. From there, I made my way into banking, and then ultimately for a firm that provides technology and outsourcing services to support investment processing, securities processing, and wealth management. So many of the firms actually here in Scotland and in the UK ultimately were clients of the firm that I worked for. It is a public company, and I made my way from sales to product development to working for the chief information officer, and then only for the CFO as Chief Risk Officer for a publicly traded U.S. corporation in financial services, highly regulated and sprawled across the globe, here in the UK, in Ireland, with operations in technology in India, as well as operations in the United States. We're losing it now, right? That's your password?
Yeah, it's my password.
Okay, sorry. So we'll overcome these. Yeah, I have to, okay. Okay. Thank you. So we left me off somewhere around Dow 12,000. I, in the wake of the financial crisis, agreed to take the responsibility to create a risk function for this public company. And over the course of that 7 years, worried about everything from cybersecurity, data breaches, and operational resilience of our systems, should they be under attack, to whether or not there was enough salt on the sidewalks when our employees were coming in from the parking lot, lest they slip on ice, and everything in between from AML, KYC, and the like. As part of that journey, a little over 3 years ago, I became familiar with what was going on in Bitcoin and blockchain and was quite excited by what I saw and what might happen for financial services in particular. Did quite a bit of networking on the company's behalf in the startup community in the United States as well as here in the UK. And on the side, started to look at the promise of the technology and the potential, particularly with that eye to security, as an area of focus. So I don't want to spend too much time on what it is that we're doing. I'm certainly open to talking about that. But I thought what I could bring to the community is really some perspective and some historic perspective with an eye to being not pedantic, but hopefully a bit provocative. This field is dominated by folks that have the kind of expertise in computer science and cryptography, game theory and the like, and it's very important. Years of work, decades of work, as ICOS has reflected, and certainly as Charles has been active in the community. That said, I do have some concerns. I think there are, in addition to promise, limitations, and in fact, dangers. And while I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak, I want to reflect on some of that in context and in history, and talk about a way forward that is inclusive, and then a little bit of why Scotland. Why Scotland is particularly well poised to provide the bridge that I'm concerned to demonstrate. So some of you would well recognize this. Any hands on what it is that I've represented here? Anyone else? Charles, I would have expected to know that. This is, in fact, the Genesis block for the Bitcoin blockchain. And what's interesting is the ingenuity of the party or parties behind it had in mind something else. There was a text message that accompanied that block. And so this was, in fact, in 2009. If you'll recall, September 2008 is when Lehman went down and when the financial markets had a stroke, which is a generous way to describe what happened. The world as we knew it was, in fact, on the brink. So it's very interesting to consider that while there was a design concern that rendered itself in terms of these cryptographic proofs and key management and the like, that behind that was an agenda and a concern. And a reasonable one. Coming from Wall Street, believe me, I was alarmed and disturbed by some of the excesses that had taken place, and particularly as a firm in the plumbing, if you will, concerned about the contagion effects and what might have occurred. So these interventions that occurred by central banks and the bailouts certainly had two sides to the coin and two sides to the story. So yes, in fact, Satoshi Nakamoto is associated with that. Less than 5 years later, and Charles will recognize this if I can get this to work. And it's not. Apologies. There we go. Bootstrapping a DAC. Surely everyone knows what a DAC is, right? Decentralized Autonomous Corporation. This was September of 2013. Apologize for the formatting. It looked a little nicer on my laptop. And behind that was a question. Can we remove management from the equation? A little more profound. Clearly, we understand that Satoshi Nakamoto's electronic cash, peer-to-peer, was focused on disintermediating the financial system. This is a more profound statement about disintermediating management. In fact, the idea was potentially to encode mission statements, pay people, marshal hardware to serve the decentralized autonomous corporation. We know this now to be the world of Ethereum and the work of Vitalik Buterin along with others. There was another question and ultimately ambition that informs this part of the community, which is that in fact you will have a resource democracy mechanism, as it was phrased at the time, to vote on the correct value of some fact. And in fact, when you boil down a lot of the cryptography and what's going on, the work on consensus mechanisms, it really does boil down to this simple description, which I borrowed from Jeff Garzik of Block, who's a Bitcoin core developer. And it's the concept of fact generators and algorithmic verifiers. He tried to simplify the world down to those two. And inside of that is the concept of a smart contract that acts to verify and create this quorum of derived facts, which we now know and understand to be discussions around consensus mechanisms. And clearly there's some important work that will be done here at the University of Edinburgh around that. Today, this is what that fact-based world looks like. This is actually a picture of Ethereum about 3 weeks ago when some of the burden of the ICOs was starting to weigh a little bit on it. I understand some of this, but I'll confess that much of it is beyond what is within my ken, and there is actually a qualifier over there on the far right that this does not fully represent the Ethereum virtual machine. This is just a snapshot. The reason I pull back the lens here is we really now have about 10 years of history from the early work that was done by the core developers, the issuance of the paper, and where we are today. And I think it's important to pull that lens back, and this is where I will step back from being the business person, the entrepreneur that has stepped into this field and embraced the great promise, and want to bring to the fore concerns I have that come from history and the nature of human affairs. I want to step back and look at the broader rhythm here, beyond business, commercial, and technology issues, beyond the latent political and economic concerns that are being raised, to suggest that there are broader philosophical and ethical issues to be addressed in a larger community, whether it involves folks from the legal profession and compliance, folks from economics, or other areas, to complement the work that's being done and the extraordinary work that's being done by the engineers, by the scientists, and the academicians, and those who've thrown their shoulder and their monies behind this. So now, I don't know if you can see that. I'll offer you another one. Anyone recognize this? It's actually 500 years ago. I'm going back 10 years to 500 years. It was actually one of 95 theses presented by a then quite obscure monk on a church in Wittenberg, Germany. And his particular concern in Thesis 28 was, frankly, a contestation of the idea that the Pope and the Catholic Church could act to intercede between me, my salvation, and God. That was Martin Luther. Martin Luther fundamentally proposed to disintermediate the Catholic Church. And when you walk through the grievances he had about indulgences and what was going on in the Vatican, and then the subsequent debates that he endured, and ultimately his excommunication in 1521, some 4 years later, it really was fundamentally about the idea that we were justified by faith, that there weren't intermediaries that were necessary. It's an important perspective to have because ultimately that brought to bear a lot of other forces in society that were posing fundamental challenges to the organization of society across politics, economics, the nature of mandates and governance and authority, and where those mandates come from. And Luther, in his train, ultimately excommunicated, had to lament what was an outbreak of peasant wars and some extremism that he even himself challenged. I'll not belabor the subsequent history of the Reformation, except to say this is a very important point, because one other element of his conviction was this, the Latin sola scriptura, only what is written. Only what is written. Now, if you know your Reformation history, you know that ultimately there were competing truth claims about the Bible and how it was, what was written and what, in fact, it meant. Those competing truth claims led to fragmentation and sectarianism that today we understand to be Lutherans, Calvinists, Methodists, Anabaptists. And yes, the Catholic Church and the Counter-Reformation. Think about that. Only what is written, yet a debate about what that actually means, what the intention was, and raging debates fundamentally about that basic proposition, about the relationship, the direct relationship. I bring this up because today we sit in a world in which some would propose, once again, if I can get it to work, the code is law. Code is law. Sola scriptura. Competing truth claims. Bitcoin, Bitcoin Classic. Ethereum, Ethereum Classic. On to the next generation, which leaves both in the rearview mirror, right? It's fascinating to look at this, that those who are most deeply informed, as were theologians at the time, what was considered to be a narrow debate around very precise issues that perhaps could only be understood by that community, in fact, was part of far larger forces and a resolution that ultimately we came to at the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. And one of my concerns is that beyond the factionalism and the sectarianism that we're seeing, which we can admire or in some cases have sleeves rolled up and are ambitiously doing the hard work here, is that at some level, the Enlightenment project that was highly rationalist, deterministic, empirical, and likewise reductionist, is a danger that we fear that we are confronting today. That if we reduce human affairs to mere math, to determinism, dare I say Turing complete, whether it's in blockchain or artificial intelligence, we're leaving behind fundamental propositions around human affairs and institutions and why they exist. So governance, transparency, fairness, privacy, and accountability. These are all issues that are alive and relevant. In our case, our work's being done in a field that's highly regulated in healthcare. The field I came from was finance, which likewise has significant regulations for a long range of reasons. How far is the dialogue going? I think I just want to put this out to you so that as you observe what's going on, and you see coming from a lot of different directions, as we move from blockchain 1.0 to 1.5 to 2 to 3 or whatever it is, as the concepts around decentralization and distributed ledgers and consensus mechanisms evolve, as we marshal and more efficiently the capabilities and the promise that exists, we have to ask ourselves, how far is too far, and what questions should I be asking? So here's one. I've mentioned my concern about governance. Some of you may be familiar with QTUM. It's an ICO. I'll let Charles address that issue. They propose a decentralized governance protocol that is self-regulating, self-aware, self-modifying. Sounds like a pretty strong ambition. I'll not pull up the video, but it's quite elegant if you take a look at it. There's actually sustainable, elegant, fast, powerful. You're in kind of a special world there where this blockchain is, in fact, foreseeably self-aware and self-modifying. But there's a problem. I spent some time on the white paper, and it's a common problem. It has a fire alarm bell, just in case there's a judgment committee. That judgment committee happens to be people. Maybe it'll be an algorithm at some point. But just in case, there's a bypass system to make decisions without prior voting results. Okay? This is the conundrum and the problem that we're in. This is the conundrum and the problem that the Ethereum community is experiencing, and really anyone that wants to make that leap to machine, and that reliance upon that, and what that burden of transparency would be. Another figure from the Ethereum community, Gavin Wood, is working on what's known as Polkadot, by way of parity technologies, and they propose a global consensus layer for trust-free inter-chain transactions, parachains, the relay chains, and proof of authority and the like. And in fact, that's part of the point, is trying to keep up the good work that's going to be done around proof of stake here. But there's proof of elapsed time, there's proof of existence, there's proof of publication, there's proof of acceptance, there's proof of authority. In fact, if you go beyond the open source public blockchains and look at the permissioned R3, Corda, Hyperledger, and others, you have a common problem at some level and terminology that's going to sound very familiar, but actually is going to be mathematically driven and science driven. Validators, collators, nominators, notaries, oracles, curators. Go on and on and on. If you spend time trying to get into this detail, the detail matters. But we're pulling back to concepts that have weight and substance in the real world and consequence. So I ask you, when you see something and it's identified as canonical, and a transaction upon which you're relying on validators and relays, to ask yourself a fundamental question about the code, the coders, the community, and whether or not there's in fact a word that I haven't used yet, some sort of fiduciary responsibility and accountability that exists if we are to relieve ourselves and yield to the power of and promise of the technology. So lest it feel like I'm piling on, I've actually pitched my own future into this community and into this world because I have a strong conviction that we can make change. But I'm of a cast of mind and temperament that says that going to great levels of abstraction and trying to simplify and be deterministic does not, in the end, get us where we need to be, that it encourages and promotes extremism when really, in fact, we all ought to be under the umbrella. Be careful, moderate, prudent, and practical, systematic and disciplined in how we approach and look at this with an aspiration that we will, in fact, be able to evolve over time. That within this world, in addition to the mathematicians, the game theorists, the economists, the developers and computer engineers, that in fact we need to welcome the philosophers, the ethicists, the attorneys, the business people, yes, the regulators, sociologists. I'll observe that Cal Berkeley has just announced that they're doing work, particularly in this area of the economics, game theory, and the like. There's a conference in early October where they're trying to bring the best thinking from the various communities together. So there is a recognition, I think, in academia and universities at large, that there is a larger set of questions. In context, then, I've referred to what I thought was the Enlightenment project, this concept of determinism and highly rationalist. In fact, Scotland, and more broadly within the UK, there is an example of a pragmatism and a deliberateness that honors the past but pushes against the future. And Edmund Burke put it well, and hence, rather than calling this Rage Against the Machine, which was my alternative presentation title, Reflections on the Revolution, implying the revolution in France. So here I'm suggesting, as Burke did, that if, in fact, the institutions that we have are unwilling or impervious to change, aren't willing to contemplate and accommodate, then in fact we will lose that which we have. So I'm very much have pitched myself in here, and in that sense, the Scottish Enlightenment, I am humbled to be standing here talking in this way, knowing Keynes and Hume and Adam Smith, and then the genius of the scientists and engineers and others on into the 18th and 19th century and beyond. I'm humbled to be talking even in these terms because it is quite astonishing where we are. As an American, we're not very laid back. So one of the reasons I would offer as to why we're here is whenever I get in my can-do mode as an American, I get the I but back from the Scots. I but, okay? And that's the dialogue we need to have. So I thank you. Probably not what you expected, and I apologize for the glitches technologically.
your seat. Lambda man. Guys, sit down. All right, thank you. Well, thank you, Susan. Thank you, Aguilos. I really appreciated the presentations. Susan, I love the Latin. That was great. My favorite phrase was alia jacta est, which means the die is cast, probably uttered by Caesar as he crossed the Rubicon. Anyway, I thought for a while about what should my presentation be. Usually I base these things extemporaneously, so I haven't prepared any slides, so you get to see our nice model of Conway's Game of Life behind me. It's in 3D and it's interactive. See it on our website, so I'll spin it a little bit to distract all of you while I talk. Anyway, lately I've been getting a lot of questions about ICOs. It seems to be vogue. So what the heck is that? What are these questions about? And does it live in something that we can categorize, understand, can make meaningful? So I've been in the cryptocurrency space for a very long time, so long that Bitcoin wasn't worth very much when I first came in. When I was first playing around, it was under $1. Imagine that, and nobody really cared about it. You had a meetup group, and like 6 people would show up, and one of them thought it was like for something totally different. He's like, where are the Pokemon cards? Like, no, this is not a game. It's like, it's crypto, man. And then, the big year was 2013. There, all of a sudden, it got valuable, like countries were collapsing, all these cool things were happening. We had the Mt. Gox crisis, and the first ICO occurred, in my understanding. It was called Mastercoin. J.R. Willett did it, along with a litany of other people, and boy, it was an exciting time. He was on Bitcoin Talk, and it's like our forum, man. That's where we got all our news. Satoshi posted there. It was a good place. And he said, I got this idea of a meta token, and it can be any token, and you can issue your own tokens. And everybody's like, wow, JR is going to make some money. This is going to be crazy. So he created a little forum post and a thread, and he had something called an Exodus address. It was just a little itty bitty address that was actually on the page, and said, send me some Bitcoin, you'll get some Mastercoin. And he raised $600,000 in 1 month. Okay, and to give you some context, this was actually sent to his home computer, I think in his mother's basement or something like that. And he's like, I just made $600,000. Oh my God, I need to start a company and like hire people and do stuff and foundation. And so he partnered with some really good people, and they were able to kind of take it some way. Very shortly thereafter, people realized, wow, these are actually really interesting events. Let's try them. So Angel Shares came along, and that was about 4 million, pretty impressive. And then after Angel Shares, there was Ethereum. That was $18 million. That was the big daddy. Everybody's like, wow, $18 million to a kid? Nothing's going on. Well, that's just insane. And then all of a sudden, we're now in an era where if you have an ICO, you raise $18 million, the first question you get is, what did you do wrong? Okay, so the space has certainly changed a lot. In the meantime, there's actually been some other fundraising mechanisms that have materialized, and they've been studied and played with. For example, there are share drops. Anybody ever hear of that? So what is a share drop? Anybody hear of Ethereum? Show of hands for Ethereum. Okay, anybody hear of Ethereum Classic? Okay, that's kind of a share drop. What you do is you just pick a point in time, and you just copy the ledger over and say, now you have an Ether and an Ether Classic. Which one came first is a debate, but basically now you have 2 units of account. Now, this is something that pisses economists off, because the rational behavior should be that if you just clone money and you give somebody another ledger, what's the first thing they do? They paid nothing for it, so they should just sell it till it goes to zero, right? Because no matter what they sell it at, they make some money. Yet, this has been tried several times, and these ledgers are actually holding value. Ethereum Classic's at about 1.3 billion right now. That shouldn't happen, economically speaking. Anyway, it was also tried with proto-shares to BitShares, somewhat successfully, and a couple of other projects. Anybody hear of Counterparty? Show of hands for Counterparty. Okay, we got a crypto crowd, right. So they tried something called proof of burn. Does anybody know what proof of burn is? So basically what you do is you take your token and you destroy the token. And when you destroy the token, you get a new token for that. So it's an upgrade. You're like, I don't like my Bitcoin, I'm going to destroy my Bitcoin, and I'm going to get a counterparty token. It's up to you to decide whether that's a good deal or not, but it's a really clever and interesting mechanism. It's kind of like going from Windows 95 to Windows 98. Can't go back. Okay, so there's been some other schemes like the DAO, which is in the news lately, because apparently the SEC has some comments on it, which are quite pleasant. That I'll leave it for you guys to dissect, and probably 25 other things I haven't mentioned. So what's the point? The point is we live in an economy now where anybody, anywhere in the world, regardless of where they're born or who they are, the color of their skin, their religion, their gender, they can raise money. And they can raise lots of money to do basically anything that they want from anybody. This has never been the case in human history. The reason why we have cities like London and New York and Dubai and Tokyo is these are financial hubs. These are where all the rich people are. These are where all the economic opportunities are. So you want to do a startup, where do you go? Go to a place like Silicon Valley, right? That's where all the VCs are. That's where you're supposed to be the .com guy. Now you can be the .com guy here in Scotland or in Ethiopia or in Nigeria. That's a really powerful thing. But what's important to understand is that these new tools don't solve foundational, fundamental business problems. They don't substitute for due diligence. They don't substitute for risk controls. They don't substitute for management. They don't substitute for organizational problems. These are just more efficient channels to capitalize you in your effort to build something, whatever that thing happens to be. And I think this is a point that's been forgotten. If you look at some of the recent ICOs, which shall remain nameless, and you read their terms of sale, these guys say things like, this is a donation, we have no responsibilities, we can take our money and spend it on our favorite substances if we want. Well, they don't say that, they imply it. And we can do basically anything we want to do. We have no moral, fiduciary, or any other responsibility. And then they go and raise $200 million. Now, why would people give them money for that? Because they say, oh, well, I know the game. You don't really mean that. You're actually going to do this. You're actually going to build this, but you got to say that, you know, for the tax man or for the regulator. That's a bad position to be in. So I could spend this whole talk bashing on the moral hazards and the things that I've seen, the things I've witnessed, which are extensive. Or I could try to propose a better future, some way we can use the magic of cryptography and the magic of these beautiful distributed systems to potentially get us out of this mess. So the first thing to understand is that regulation is global and laws are fractured and fragmented. So the Securities Exchange Commission is very powerful and has a very long reach, but it's not God. And even if they said everything is illegal and everything should be shut down, the reality is that there's still going to be stuff going on in China and stuff going on here in Europe and elsewhere. So one has to take a step back and say, if we are actually going to create some controls and make these systems work and make them useful and safe or safer than they are right now, regulation actually has to be global. Second, it can't be controlled by a country. Why? Well, sometimes countries are good, and sometimes you elect an orange president and countries become bad. And I'll leave it for you to decide who's your favorite orange president. There's been a few. So anyway, it's probably not a good idea to rely upon a jurisdiction. You might want to have a more global way of looking at things, a more international way of looking at things. The problem then is, well, how do you actually enforce things? How do you capture intent? Well, we have these things called smart contracts. They're pretty cool. Do they replace the legal system? No. But what you can do is look at older things like Lex Mercatoria, the law of the merchants. That's another Middle Age thing. We're pulling a lot of Middle Age stuff because I guess we're in Scotland. Edinburgh is very old. Anyway, Mercatoria was like a legal system for all these merchants in Europe, completely independent of the nation state. You can look at maritime law as a modern-day equivalent to that. If you're a shipping company and you ship to 80, 90 countries, do you really want to have a lawyer in every single one of those countries? Do you really want to get sued in every one of those countries, have to deal with each of those legal systems? No. You want one standard that everybody follows. So we as humans have gotten pretty good at building these international legal systems. We as humans have gotten pretty good at dealing with things on an international basis. What we're not so good at is dealing with ambiguity and dealing with dispute resolution and also capturing intent perfectly. We're historically very bad at that. So despite the fact that we have more lawyers today than we've ever had in human history, and more laws today than we've ever had in human history, we've gotten pretty bad at capturing intent and dealing with dispute resolution. So my first point is that ICOs are not a new problem. They're just an old problem bundled with new technology, but they do open an interesting opportunity. Instead of trying to figure out what should the regulations be and which jurisdiction should control this and how do we comply with the tax man and the boogeyman, we have a window of time. It's going to close, but we have a window right now. It's a few years maybe a few months, who knows. But one day it'll close. But for the time being, we have a time to regulate ourselves. We have a time to actually decide what the rules ought to be. And we have a time to actually enshrine these laws, these rules, in smart contracts and in self-regulatory organizations. And you'll say, oh, Charles, that'll never work. It's never been done. Well, you know, we did in Switzerland. When I went to Switzerland back in 2014, you talk to the Swiss and Zug, they had absolutely no idea what Bitcoin was. Their common response is what I heard in the newspapers, and it wasn't pleasant. The tip of their tongue was Mount Gox at the time. They had no idea anything about cryptography or hash functions, much less smart contracts. And now we have Crypto Valley there. There's over 40 companies operating there. There's a self-regulatory organization that people can join. You can pay your taxes and fees in Zug, in Bitcoin. That's a big change in a very short period of time within a historically very conservative country. Switzerland doesn't move very quickly. The entire point of Switzerland is it kind of stays the same, and it's neutral, and it doesn't go one way or the other. The country doesn't work otherwise. So why would they embrace something like this? Because they realize that this is actually a revolution. It's a really cool new financial stack. And they have a long legacy of being an innovator in this respect. So we convinced them, and many other people came and convinced them to give us a shot. Now, there's going to be some problems. There's certainly a litany of bad actors, and there's going to be a lot of downsides. But the whole point of this presentation is to convey to you that if you're open to the dialogue and you're open to thinking, we probably as a community can come up with a better way of raising capital that's safer. We can put controls in and figure out how to do KYC and AML. We can use cryptography to protect both the buyer and the seller. And overall, I think we actually have an opportunity to build an entirely new system that makes a heck of a lot more sense than the systems designed on the back of the Great Depression in a very different time and a very different set of technology. You know, as a final point, regardless of what we do or regardless of what regulators decide, this space isn't going anywhere. You know, as I said, alia jacta est. We've crossed the Rubicon. The reality is that this technology is open source, it's pervasive, and it's carrying with the internet. It's almost like a virus. It's infected the internet. So it's here, the ideas are here, and I firmly believe that over an arc of time, we're going to see a fundamental reinvention of the entire financial systems. The way we trust each other, the way we quantify reputation, the way we do credit, the way we do lending, the way we move money, all these things will gradually change. The problem that we haven't resolved is what direction will it go? The very same things that make these systems so efficient and so global and so magical can be co-opted by the right people to make these systems very bad for us. Can you imagine a world where if you piss off a government, they flip a switch, you no longer have access to your money or your identity or anything else? These systems could enable that at one point. Can you imagine a world where everything you've ever bought is recorded and can be used against you at a later date if you piss the wrong person off? Again, these systems could go that way. So one of the reasons why IOHK invested in this lab is we wanted to invest in a different vision, one that's a bit more transparent, private, and fair, and a bit more disintermediated from the jurisdiction. We wanted to leave a long chain of open source protocols and implement these protocols in a way that would put everybody on equal footing, so that the world would actually be a better place. So that's basically the substance of my talk. ICOs are here to stay. They present some problems, but I believe we can fix them. And what I really love to do is Q&A, and I suspect a lot of you people have them, including Duncan in the back, who already raised his hand. So having said that, thank you all for coming, and I'd love to have your questions. On the internet, no one knows you're a dog. Sure. Right.
Can you use an ICO-like thing without having to recreate a new
Sure. So you want to sell shares, and the people who buy it profit when you profit. So it's like a traditional IPO. Yeah, so that is possible to do. And actually, Delaware, I believe, has changed legislation recently to allow companies to issue shares on a blockchain. You'd still be regulated. There'd still be KYC and AML, and you'd have to provide a prospectus, and you'd be under existing securities laws, which are a bit too draconian for most startups. There's an economy of scale with these things, and there was never an assumption that you could just turn the key and capitalize your company through these types of channels. So the regulations aren't geared or structured towards a small company. They're geared and structured to like a $500 million, billion type of a range. But it is possible to do, and I suspect that the crypto equity market will grow over the next 5 to 10 years to be one of the largest markets for cryptocurrencies. What's holding it back is regulatory clarity and certainty, but that'll almost certainly come in the next 2 to 3 years.
Is there anything that cryptocurrency has to do itself to make it easier to share issues on that?
No, you still need to issue a token, and you need a ledger to account the tokens, but then you have to ask some questions, meta questions like, what are the voting rights? Do you have a clawback provision where you can repurchase the shares? Do you have the ability to do season equity offerings, otherwise issue more shares? All of these things. Those can be programmed into the ERC-20 standard if desired. So there's definitely already a way to do it on Ethereum that's pretty robust. And I suspect that future products coming soon probably will make it easier to do that as well. Yes?
I'm presently involved in an ICO based in Ethereum, preparing it right now.
Okay. Are you guys doing an ERC-20 token?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
So you get all this money in, as you refer to, all this cryptocurrency, Bitcoin,
Right.
digital, altcoin, whatever. How do you actually convert that to real life money to run your business with the developers and stuff? To actually start?
Okay, so the first question is, who is the issuing agent? Who's actually doing the offering? So when you're sending your, saying, give me money, where is the fund aggregating to? There's going to be an account, multi-sig or signal signature. Somebody controls those keys. Now, is that a person, group of people, or a corporation, a company, a foundation, a trust, a for-profit entity? So that's kind of the first question. Now, if that's a corporation, an entity, that entity could have a bank account. And if that's the case, then you could go to an exchange and sell it for capital, or you can sell it through an OTC. Now, there are some challenges here. Let's say this is not a security, as many people who do ICOs want to say. Then what have you done? You've sold product. And Her Majesty loves when you sell product. She taxes you for that, doesn't she? Right. So if you do an ICO and you aggregate funds and you're up the position, it's not a security, you've achieved a huge amount of income because you've taken something that cost you nothing to create or very little to create, and you've made all this profit. So there's this big cream filling that you have a certain amount of tax on it. That's one component. The other side is if you sell to U.S. purchasers, depending on facts and circumstances, this could be classified as a security under the Howey test, in which case you may down the line have a regulatory event. And even worse, the token you've issued could be delisted from exchanges. Even worse, the people who buy and trade the token could face some consequences. So my recommendation, if you guys are doing that, is to get some legal assistance and very clearly define what the offering is, the governance of it, the corporate structure that holds the funds. And as the recent SEC ruling about the DAO indicates, just because one would raise to a decentralized organization or use some decentralized kabuki, that doesn't change the facts and circumstances of the offering. Sure.
We have spoken with HMRC in the UK, people like Financial Conduct Authority and so on. They are all clueless. And the HMRC people, that's their policy leaders at the top of the tree, have actually said, well, if you do get the money from nowhere, it's not actually a capital gain if you're using it in the business. It's a conflict in itself of what the HMRC is there to do,
Right.
which is to take some money off you when it comes into real fiat. But my question was really about how do you convert it into fiat?
You just sell it on an exchange. If you have Ether, Ether trades for dollars, so you sell it. But you need to talk to lawyers and get some business advice about the best hedging strategy. Some people leave all their assets in crypto. I feel that's irresponsible from a fiduciary aspect because you're not paid to be a currency speculator. You're paid to build something. So you ought to hedge it, but then the question is how do you do that? What currency pairs? That's a case-by-case basis based on the business objectives of the company. Next question. Orpheus, right? Yeah, I remember. It's Dreads. Right.
as a matter of fact. And thirdly, that we're going to a direction where there will be some kind of regulation, maybe decentralized, maybe global, for decentralized ICOs.
Right.
Do you think that this, combined with the fact that we actually need more innovation right now, because startups is something that we need, and something that maybe 20 years ago was not here.
Right.
And, we didn't need it, but now we need it because we have all this technology and we don't know how to use it, as a matter of fact. Do you think that ICOs could actually help give a new push to innovation and to trusting the small guy?
Well, anytime a little guy has access to capital, it does change things. Like, anybody remember Kickstarter? Yeah, okay. And what did that give us? It gave us the Oculus Rift. It's pretty cool. You know, it also gave us some good video games like Pillars of Eternity. You know, there's some good things there. So it's pretty cool when you have these new capital foundations that allow the little guy to actually now get access to the funds to build something. My point is a little bit broader. It's that just because now you have a channel, a new channel to get access to something, doesn't change the reality that you have to deliver the product. And the reality of all businesses is they fail. 90% fail within 5 years. So the vast majority of time, if you take $1, that dollar is going to be lost in some form of an endeavor. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad endeavor. If you think about it strictly speaking, Netscape was a failure. It's no longer operating. Anybody use JavaScript? Anybody use the cookie? Anybody use a web certificate? Netscape gave us a lot of great stuff. So the point of it is that where should the money come from? Now, the historical opinion of regulatory bodies is the rich people get the luxury of gambling. That's why we have like accredited investors or these types of classes and say those people, they have enough money, they should be allowed to just roll the dice. And the little person, that little person doesn't have lawyers and accountants and scientists and other people they can call and talk to. So we should provide some more protections for them and say the things that they can buy are a bit more restricted than what the rich people ought to be able to buy. So this is the very 20th century inspired by many financial crises, from the Knickerbocker crisis to the Great Depression and crises that have come after, opinion of how things ought to be. The challenge that regulators in the 21st century are going into, and this is a very powerful challenge, is that A, it's going to become more difficult to know how much money you have as a consequence of these crypto assets. Just like on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. On the internet, nobody knows how much Zcash you have, right? And as these things become more pervasive in 10 years and 20 years and 30 years, I might not know if you're a millionaire or not. So that's one of the first problems. The other challenge is that even if I say I'm going to be your parent and protect you and prevent you from doing something, you probably can find a workaround for it. For example, government says you shouldn't file share. How many people watch Game of Thrones? Yeah. And how many people watch bootleg copies of Game of Thrones? There's actually more people watching illegal versions of it than legal versions of it, right? And regulation is going to actually suffer this same problem. As money moves to a digital system, you now have a system that's no longer controlled by banks and suspicious activity reports and tightly controlled flow channels. You have a system that operates much more like cash, but cash you can teleport from one side of the world to the other side of the world. So I do believe that entrepreneurs will have these channels available to them. But to avoid becoming a scarlet letter, we do need to proactively come up with some sort of standards to protect people. The other thing is that failures will teach us a lot of good lessons. The failure of the DAO will actually teach us how to build a better DAO. And at some point, I think another one will exist, and it will exist in a much more responsible and better structure than the prior one, and probably revolutionize VC. Yes?
Right now, volume around Bitcoin is like
relative to gold, oil, the equity markets, bond markets, even currency. You can just get larger and larger, right? And these things are always have to be kept in perspective. So the mental picture is how many buildings in Manhattan can I buy? If you can buy the whole island, then we're talking like a legitimate thing. If you can only buy like part of downtown, or if you like Brooklyn, part of Brooklyn, it's still a relatively small industry. So for the most part, regulators treat this as more of a nuisance, because the problem is there's no predefined box to put this in from a tax side. Like the IRS in the United States, I think it's Administrative Ruling 2014-14, where they say treat it like property. Just madness. In fact, my co-founder brought up something today. The sharecrop creates a tax problem for every single holder of a cryptocurrency. So imagine this as a thought experiment. The IRS says that I pay you in Bitcoin. It's like when I give you a car, or a baseball glove, or a painting. You have to pay taxes up front for that at the fair market value. So let's say I clone Bitcoin. Did you consent to receiving a Bitcoin Classic? No. You just got it. You have access to it. Suddenly I just created it out of thin air. But technically, now you have an income event because I've just given you this new token and you have to pay income tax on it and whatever the hell the fair market value of that is. Right? Even if you don't even know you have it, even if you have no access to it, even if you've lost the wallet, that's still technically maybe an income event. So you're actually right when you say it's kind of like a bit of madness that the regulations don't fit very well. And the challenge is not only do you have to build up a huge amount of core competency to make the regulations potentially plausible, you have this enforcement bubble where people can live outside of the bubble very carefully, very easily, and on a more global basis. And guess what? Switzerland's not going to copy the United States. They're just going to do their own thing, as will China, as will Japan, as will the European Union, as will the UK, increasingly so. So we can't look to nation states to be able to give us clarity here as a field. As a matter of practicality, the first thing we have to do as a community is say, what can we bake into the protocols themselves or to the smart contracts themselves to create some consumer protections and to create some reasonable outcomes? And then the next level is, what consortia and standards can we create and perhaps enforce through insurance markets or through self-regulation that will create good outcomes? And then there's still going to be small regulatory gaps. And then there's an open question to a regulator. Do you need to then throw everybody in jail and say the whole industry is bad, or can you use legacy systems like good old-fashioned fraud? A great example would be Paycoin in Garza. This guy committed fraud. They didn't say Paycoin is a security and let's throw all these guys in jail. No, they said you committed fraud. Now it's in jail for 20 years, right? So you can use the old system and the old tools on a case-by-case basis when you have egregious actors. It doesn't require you to destroy the entire bottom of the stack and wrap everything into a regulation created in 1933. It just makes no sense at all. Next question. Sir?
You mentioned, go back to what the gentleman said there, you mentioned maritime law.
Yep.
And you discussed with the gentleman here about talking to a lawyer. Maritime law is based on contract law. Now you're sucking that person into the laws that have been around for a long time that have screwed the person for a long time.
Aye.
That's exactly it. So why would you entertain the jurisdiction and say, yeah, I'll accept your jurisdiction? Don't accept it. Why do you accept it?
Because he has to operate, and if he has to live, and I assume he doesn't want to go to jail. So a
contract is when you say I accept.
So here, we have Satoshi Nakamoto, and actually had a very valid viewpoint. What did he do? He said, my imagination is, he said something like, wow, people go to jail for doing private currencies and all this financial kabuki. I don't know what the law is. So he stayed completely anonymous, totally so, and was somehow able to preserve that anonymity.
He might have built Bitcoin before he done that.
Right. So he built a whole system from that, right? So if you want to step outside of the system, it's more than just saying, I'm not going to talk to anybody, I'm just going to do contract law and figure it out for myself. You have to actually create an alias and live completely outside of the entire system and have some damn good OPSEC. Worked for Satoshi, didn't work so good for Dread Pirate Roberts. So if you have an abundance of caution and you want to stay in the legacy world, you unfortunately have to play by the legacy world's rules. I wish I had something better to say, because I mean, it's like
I just say I don't contract.
What's that?
I don't contract.
You don't contract? Well, there's always a contract, oral or otherwise.
No, there's not. I deny your contract. I will accept your contract. You can always accept a contract on a provisional acceptance. I will accept your contract on the provision you pay me $1 million.
You see, now I know why the English have had so much difficulty with the Scottish. But it's a fun point. Next question. Come on, there's got to be some more. All right, okay.
So I'm coming across from the business school here, and it's good to hear the conversations, not just from the technical perspective. So with this new lab set up, part of the aim is to try and engage with research and portray towards the future, and some earlier talks as well talked about starting off with the opportunities and what the problems are and trying to solve them, rather than just starting with the blockchain and going backwards. From a research perspective and engaging people in the conversation, obviously there's people like yourself that are interested in it and try and get involved, but how do you open that up to the rest of the university perhaps for getting the economics departments, business school engaged, and the likes of the labs and this type of thing?
Right. Well, you know, the first thing you do is you look at the interdisciplinary research institutes and see how they've been able to historically get different departments to talk to each other. The one I like the most is the Santa Fe Institute. Are you familiar with them? Okay, so you should look them up. They're amazing. And they're based in New Mexico, maybe Santa Fe. But anyway, they're a great interdisciplinary research group. You know, historically, the big daddy of all of those is the Princeton Institute of Advanced Study. They did a little bit of science, but also literature. I think T.S. Eliot was in there when Oppenheimer was leading in. So you look at historical inspiration and say, how do we get different departments with radically different perspectives in every incentive to silo to break the silos up and talk to each other? That's kind of the first question. The second question is you say, well, how do we produce publications? Academics don't like money, they like CVs. And they have this command called append to CV, and they try to call it as often as possible because it gets some things like tenure and status and awards and prizes, and it's a currency in the system. So any research you do, you always have to think in the back of your mind, in addition to this being useful and interesting, it will result in a reasonable publication that can survive peer review. The challenge with interdisciplinary papers is historically that's maybe a little bit more difficult because it's hard to understand where you should submit it to and who should review it and so forth. You see, I have this great treatise on cryptography, theology, and women's studies. I don't really know what committee I should be sending this to and how I'm going to get a good review of that paper. You know? So those are some of the preliminary challenges. The good news is that over time, academia is becoming more interdisciplinary. Second, this is a very sexy topic. And there already are some centers that are doing some interesting work, like Victor Di Filippi over at the Berkman Center at Harvard has co-authored some interesting things. If you look at, I think it's Codex over at Stanford Law, there's some interesting things going on there. Alex Pentland has also started getting involved in the DCI. In fact, he even authored a cryptocurrency paper. So there's some historically social sciencey or regulatory people that are starting to pull their way into the cryptocurrency space, and that's pretty welcome. So my recommendation is look to the past, look to the centers that already exist, and then try to extract a model from that, and then just go shoe leather. Go talk to the departments and see who wants to do something somewhere. The hook you have is there's probably good grant money for it. This blockchain is really nice. Maybe funding is another hook. Next question. Yes.
Out of the several industries that you know of using blockchain, which one do you think has adopted it the most and is probably the most promising in terms of the future of blockchain? So I know financial services is getting there, but there's insurance, there's medical industry. Which one do you, in your opinion, has been the most open and successful with the adoption?
Well, go back to first principles. I think anything involving accounting on a global basis is damn due for innovation. I run a company, even though we're kind of small, we still operate in 10 different countries. Okay? And we have sets of books, and reconciling those books can be hard at times. And I just imagine what Microsoft has to go through, and Google has to go through, and so forth. And auditing alone, the amount of pain a Fortune 500 company has to go through to audit is insane. So could you imagine real-time continuous auditing with triple entry accounting? If you have a blockchain-based accounting system, you might actually be able to do that. And the cost of deploying such a system is pretty low. And actually, on the enterprise side, it's not more of a question of what will blockchain do for you. It's more of a question of extracting it, taking it, setting it aside, and realizing that to even get to a blockchain-based system, you have to have a lot of other fundamental components which is usually missing, like an InfoSec strategy and proper provisioning of identity in the organization, amongst many other things. And so getting to the discussion of what should be blockchain in our company you usually end up solving a litany of other IT issues that organically have not been solved because you just kind of grew into where you're at as a corporation and you're operating on old hardware, old business processes, and so forth. So I do think that you always have to temper your conversation in that. As for killer applications, anytime you have a consortium or a federation of entities that have to do business together but don't like each other and don't trust each other, a blockchain-based solution, a ledger, is probably a pretty good idea. Canonical example would be the telecommunications companies. These guys don't like each other at all. They jab each other now with pencils if there was a real version of them, right? But they still have to work together because it would be a damn shame if a packet from Verizon couldn't come over to England because there was a contract dispute. The internet wouldn't work so well. So these are areas where you have a high adversarial, semi-trusted or low-trust environment, but coordination and cooperation is required. And so I'd recommend looking there for the private permission ledger space innovation. Now, the other side of it is, what will this do to the developing world? In this case, you don't have a proper functioning identity space, a proper functioning insurance system, a properly functioning banking system, and you don't have the rule of law in a lot of these countries. So it's probably a really good idea to say, just forget the whole stack, and let's put a completely new stack in. And I think we'll see actually parallel development of the stack. You'll see private blockchains gradually iterating and refining legacy infrastructure, and then in the developing world, you'll actually see them completely replacing it and developing a parallel system. And where the money is going to be made, the big money, is the connection point. How do you bridge these two systems? How do you handle metadata and attribution and intent and arbitration and contract disputes between these two parallel systems? No coincidence the Interledger Committee at W3C is quite large. There's no coincidence that there's companies that are very well funded that think about things like sidechains. That's a bridging, right? So that's kind of my non-answer to your broad business question. Next question. And then
well, because I should say that I did study law, and a comment from my perspective, international law basically does not exist. When we say international law, what we actually mean to say is that a certain set of rules to decide what which country is going to apply to a particular case. So I'm frankly a little bit skeptical about this kind of whole idea of global regulation of ICOs. The way I understand
we don't have
ICOs,
international trade deals. There's no NAFTA. There's no trade courts. We don't have an international agreement.
Basically speaking, what they do,
multinational companies don't deal with private resolution.
What they do basically, they refer to a law to a particular country. There is no such thing as international law as business is concerned. So I'm pretty skeptical about some kind of global regulation of ICOs or Bitcoin. What I believe is realistically going to happen is that it's going to come under the regulation of a particular country. And why this is not happening yet now, my understanding, maybe it's absolutely wrong, that we do not quite understand what a token is and how it's different from the other financial instruments. So is it possible to give some kind of definition of a token?
Sure. Okay, so a token is just some instrument that carries value. Not everything in the world that carries value is a security. A baseball card carries value. Is that a security? There's facts and circumstances that go behind how it's used, how it's traded, how it's represented, that tell you whether it's a bond, a security, or some other instrument of value, maybe a currency. For example, if gold was massively accepted, you can go to the store and buy and sell things with it, we think of it more like a currency than we would like a commodity. But because it's not, we tend to think of it like a commodity. All right? So a token is just this value-carrying instrument. Now, there are other forms of tokens. We are used to them. We use them all the time. Airline miles, that's a token, carries value. I get to fly back to Colorado business class because we got some airline miles and I got to upgrade. Yeah, that's right. Okay, I'm happy about that. Is that a security? No. So we have to take a step back and realize that not everything that represents value ought to be, just because it's been used in the context of a security in some cases, is a security. That's the first point. The second point, and this is where I do differ from you respectfully, is that the cat is out of the bag. We have a system now that regardless of what the United States, the UK, or any other country says, will continue to exist and grow and get more prominent and powerful. We also have a system that regulations can be baked into it if the regulators are cooperative. So they have to say, are we just going to fight this thing and be partially adversarial to it and try to destroy it, which they haven't, and they've had the opportunity to try? Or are we going to try to work with it, mature with it, grow with it, create some standards? They've already tried this once before. When the file share revolution came out, they were incredibly harsh on Napster and all these other guys, and they put the hammer down. They were trying to throw 12-year-old girls in jail, give them million-dollar lawsuits. And we got BitTorrent. How's that working out for them? The world has changed. The DOJ went on online gaming and gambling. They went down very hard. It was a $4 billion industry back in 2007. Now it's a $40 billion industry. It didn't work out so well. So I think there are some lessons learned here and some pragmatism that's going to come into play. The other thing is that the world is becoming increasingly multipolar. Historically, we were one great empire and another. It was the America, the Soviet Union, and before that, European powers. Now we're moving into a world where the United States, when they say something and stamp their foot, doesn't necessarily mean the world's going to follow. We've already seen this with the Paris Climate Accord and many other things where Trump's decided to go in a radically different direction. The world's not following him anymore. And so I think over time, as the world becomes multipolar and as these systems become more pervasive, it will force us to start agreeing to follow international standards a bit more. And how many more financial collapses are we going to have happen before we have a radical change in the world financial order? 2008, as Susan can tell you, was not a normal collapse. It was a very psychologically traumatizing time for the entire global financial system. Countries' entire financial systems collapsed. And the American response to this was, let's make the banks bigger. Let's not put anybody in jail. Let's not have any substantive regulatory reform. And the world's not happy about that. And we're still suffering all this time later from it. So as a consequence, we've seen over the last decade a de-Americanification of the system. I guess that's a word now. And I believe that this will continue, and there are going to be key drivers that push on it. America's geopolitical aims are going to be pushing on it. This decentralization of trust and money and other such things are going to be pushing on it. An increasingly unstable world is going to be pushing on it. Things like global warming, climate change are going to be pushing on it. This is going to have economic consequences in places like Africa and Southeast Asia. And the rise of other countries like India and China, which have completely different legal systems to the US system and a completely different outlook on regulation. Chinese regulation for financial crimes is very simple. We'll let you do it until we get tired of it, and then we'll pick a victim and execute them. That's not the American system. You know, when they had this environmental crisis, what was their response when some people got poisoned? They found the CEO, they killed them. That's not how we do things in the West. Yet that system is becoming very powerful. In the next 50 years, we'll have a huge say on how regulations are going to work. So then we either going to have to decide, do we just pick one standard, in which case it's whoever is going to win the big war, or are we going to globalize and federate? And that's an opportunity for blockchain technology, in my view, to have a seat at that table as a tool that nation states can use to not give up their sovereignty. And I think that's where we're going to go. You might be right that we might go back to a monopolar world and have another empire form, maybe China, maybe another, that just controls everything and sets all the standards. But I would much rather believe that we can transcend that because our technology permits it.
Well, it's not what I suggested. I would probably suggest that you think as they are. So there will be some national institutions
They can't.
regulating it. Why?
They can't.
If you can
Because the system's too fragile and it's too global. There's too much value coming around. Interest rates are at near damn 0%. You know, we've created so much new money to recover from this crisis, and every economy is a little unstable. There's a reason why people like Trump get elected. There's a reason why Brexit happens. It's not because the weather outside's great. It's because people are angry and frustrated. The middle class is deteriorating. In the United States, in the last 15 years, no one's gotten a pay raise in the middle class. We see entire ghost towns forming in the Midwest. And we see an increased globalization occurring. So you can't keep the system the way it is, no matter if you want to or not. It's changing as a response to technology. It's changing as a response to globalization. And we're seeing a lot of friction occur, especially amongst the old economic class, because they're losing their livelihood, they're losing their wages, they're getting angrier. The very fact that magic internet tokens that have nothing backing them outside of an algorithm written by an anonymous person over the internet are worth more than $30 billion collectively is a direct response to a fundamental lack of confidence in regulators and financial systems. That's the lesson that I've learned from the cryptocurrency space. And one of the privileges I have being in the space, I get to travel a lot. I was just in Ukraine. Every single one of my Ukrainian contractors wants to be paid in Bitcoin, not the local currency. You know, I traveled to Argentina. We have people down there. Economic collapses aren't an academic question to these guys. One of our people, his father told me where he buried not only his silver, but his decoy silver when the collapse came. So because he figured the authorities were going to break into his house and steal his silver, so he wanted to have some silver for them to steal, so they wouldn't catch the big silver supply that he had.
Well, sorry. The problem with this approach is that you think it's from the perspective of the computer method, but it's kind of regulation, regulation will be decided by lawyers. And lawyers, as we know, cannot manage to agree on anything.
Well, that's not necessarily true. You have a force majeure clause. That's pretty standard. Like a force majeure clause, like a
well, it's just a clause which is actually quite different from country to country. Realistically speaking, we haven't agreed on much in laws.
All right. So it's a fair point. It's a fair disagreement. And I like to believe that we have some unique opportunities moving forward to changing it. In my view, a lawyer is more like a programmer than we care to admit. The problem is the lawyer lives within the operating system and the hardware. And their operating system, their hardware was built in a paper-based world. Long, long time ago, hundreds of years ago. And what's happening is we're seeing the operating system, the hardware upgrade, and we're moving toward algorithmic law, slowly but surely. So I do think lawyers are here to stay, but I think the lawyers are going to start thinking a lot more like computer scientists.
Sorry to run out of time.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, this is a lot of fun.
Once again, thanks everyone. Thanks to the guest speakers, Charles, Susan and ICOS. We've got the room till 9 o'clock, so feel free to hang about, help us finish off the beer. If you have any questions for Susan and ICOS, grab them, having a beer. I'm sure they'll be happy to oblige. Any more?